Mike Gallagher. Wow, what a great pleasure talking to Mike. And it gives me energy. I mean, serial entrepreneur, multiple CEO positions, bought and sold, or been in companies that sold, I believe 3 times. Lots of great lessons he learned from those. He was at AT&T, in Telecom, wireless, went networking, and now in AI. Just dynamic, smart, well experienced, humble. Gets me going, gets me amped up. It's just when experienced people can share best practices and share things that they've learned openly, it's just it's energizing. It helps everybody. It really, really does. He's got a great solution now with his FlowMind company, the startup. It's AI for managed service providers. Does a great job helping them. Talks about that as well. But just a great conversation with Mike Gallagher. Mike, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone else for watching. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz, and here's my 45-second introduction. After starting my business in the 90s, I started developing poor habits of eating in my diet because I was working way too much. Before you know it, I found myself 340 pounds. The doctor told me if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. Took the next 7 months, lost 130 pounds. People think there's some secret. Ask me, how'd you lose that weight? Like there's some secret. There is no secret. How'd I lose the weight? Just one word: discipline. I've had other successes in life, and I attribute them all to discipline. Now, I'm not the king of discipline, but I believe that it can help all of us. Friends, colleagues convinced me to start a podcast. The podcast mission: how do we better ourselves and society? I talk to interesting people in health, fitness, sport, wellness, business, technology, science, art, and culture. And I eventually ask them how discipline plays a role in their life. Podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Fantastic, Mike. I'm so excited to talk to you. I know you a little bit, and so you played soccer D1 there at Fordham.
Are we teeping now? Are we already going?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, start all over.
So tell me what position you played. I'm trying to figure out what position. Are you a striker?
I was a center mid, more on the offense, and back then, if you want to go down the soccer path, they had different formations. Today it's 4 in the back, 4 in the middle, kind of deal, and 2 in the front or 3 in the front. Back then it was 4 in the back in a diamond, and it was 4 in the front, and you only had 2 midfielders. And I was one of those 2 midfielders, and those guys were generally not the fastest, but they had the most endurance. They didn't have the most skills, but they were a little bigger and tougher because you had to play offense, you had to play defense. It was a tough position to play in those old days in the formations, because you were running up and down the field. And of course, I was 30 or 40 pounds lighter, so it'd be a little bit easier. But that's a long time ago.
Yeah, but in this fast-paced MSP landscape, how do you stay ahead? Introducing MSPinfluencer.com, your ultimate hub for MSP news, insights, and community connection, powered by Forza Dash. More than 75,000 MSPs subscribe to our MSP Influencer Pulse weekly newsletter, staying informed and ahead of industry trends. Tune in to emerging podcasts from Joey Pinz and leading MSP voices, offering essential tips, powerful insights, and success stories. Explore our multi-authored blogs, crafted specifically for MSP leaders, delivering fresh perspectives and actionable strategies. Celebrate excellence with the industry-leading Forza-Dash MSP Influencer Awards, recognizing innovation, leadership, and impact in the MSP community. Join thousands of MSP professionals who trust MSPinfluencer.com to grow their business and expand their networks. MSPinfluencer.com, where today's MSP leaders connect, collaborate, and conquer, all powered by the Forza Dash platform, helping MSP vendors work effectively with MSPs and helping MSPs grow. I mean, the center mid, Mike, you're touching the ball every 3-4 touches, right? You're the general there.
You're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I just loved the game. And I got into it because my dad didn't want me to play football because I was the smallest kid, and he was afraid I was going to get hurt. And so he said, let's go play this safe game called soccer. And, a couple broken ribs, 1 broken jaw, and 1 broken ankle later throughout a long career. Wasn't the safest sport in the world, but it's a great game. I love it. My daughters all played at very competitive levels and still play. And I just love the game.
Yeah, me too. So that was the number 10. You were number 10 at that time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so if you're controlling the ball, you're switching the ball like that. Did you play that position in high school and pre-high as well?
I did. I was always kind of a center mid, always in the midfield. Because at the time, I could shoot and I could have been a striker. but I was also a distributor of the ball. Like
Right.
I knew how to pass the ball through the creases, which most strikers are usually hogs. They just want the ball and want to shoot.
Yes.
And I was a little bit of a hybrid. I could shoot from distance, and at the same time, I actually found a lot of joy in passing the ball, with an assist. And that's how I became such a huge fan of Messi. I
Yeah,
mean,
big
there's
Messi
always
fan.
the debate who is the greatest player ever, and you get into the Ronaldo Messi debate, and Ronaldo's a phenomenal player, great striker. But Messi was more, his assists sometimes are prettier than his
Yeah,
goals, the
yeah.
way he just sees the game. So it's wonderful.
So with all the set pieces, Mike, were you in control of them?
Yeah, I was the guy that always took the shot. That was my claim to fame. So, and back then, there wasn't as much training, and I
Mm,
lived by a school, and I really didn't have a shot, and so my dad said, "Why don't you go to the wall?" There was this
yeah.
big flat wall, and I took a soccer ball, and it was just me, and like endlessly, like a robot, I would just continue to pound the ball against the wall,
Hmm.
and it was concrete. It was off of a basketball asphalt court, and the ball would come flying back to me. So I had to learn how to trap the ball because
Control it.
if I didn't, I have to go run and get it.
Yeah.
So
Right.
you didn't want to run anymore. And then I learned how to shoot a ball, and then I painted a goal on the wall.
Huh.
Got in a little trouble for that, and started seeing how I could bend it and push it into the goal, into corners and stuff like that. But endless hours of doing that was my personal coach at the time,
Man.
and that differentiated me on the field because I could hit the set piece, but also when I was hitting against the wall a couple hundred times, you learn how to shoot, right? Or you should hang up your cleats if you can't. But so what's the old saying? You do something 10,000 times, you get pretty good at it.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we see it like a lot, like here, like the Brazilian kids who play on the street and learn how to knock it off buildings and stuff like that. They get all the tight technical skills there.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, it's wonderful to see. Did any of your teammates from Fordham go on to the MLS or Europe or anything?
Some of them did. I lost track of them, but that was way back in the MLS days in the pro games. But a bunch of them, they played semi-pro ball, high-level club teams. We played against some great players. I remember probably my hardest assignment. I forget who we were playing. Was either Columbia or LIU, and my coach said, "You have to mark this guy." And I said, "Well, who is this guy?" And his name was I remember his name was Richard Shinapu,
Huh.
and he was from Trinidad, and it just so happens he was the captain of the Olympic Trinidad team.
Yeah.
And so he was about the 6'2" Adonis that I ran after for 90 minutes all day on the field, and he had his way with me. He's just an athlete on a different
Yeah.
level. So we
Yeah.
played against some great players that went on to play in the pro leagues.
You right foot dominant?
Right foot dominant, but not quite ambidextrous. But I could go either way. Right, a lot of the kids are just one foot, and that is, as I like to say, you're half a soccer player because they know where you're going,
That's
and
right.
it's hard discipline. If you take 100 kicks, you got to take up 50 on one foot. You got to take 50
Yeah,
on the
you
other.
do, you really do. Yeah. And how long have you been following Messi?
Oh, almost his whole career. I would
Really?
say 15, 17 years. I mean, I was always a fan of his in the Barcelona days from when he was young. And then he went to Paris, which I thought it was catastrophe. And then
So did
he,
he.
he so did he. And so he came back to the U.S. and now
Yeah.
we get to watch him at normal times.
In
And
Miami. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful player. And I'm so happy he got a World Cup, right?
he's got one, and he's got a shot at another, and he'll be
Yeah.
playing here in New Jersey. I don't think I'd have to mortgage my house to get tickets for the game, but
Incredible. Yeah, the World Cup will be here before you know it. It's wonderful to see. And so you think there's no contest between him and Ronaldo? You have respect for Ronaldo, but you think he's much more superior.
I do. I think he's a complete player. And Ronaldo's a complete striker,
Right.
but Messi is a complete player.
Yeah.
And so you could argue there's no winning this argument if
Mm.
someone's passionate on either side. But he's just a more complete player. And when you look at the style of Barcelona, like 10 years ago when they had Xavi and Iniesta and those guys, that was the greatest soccer team that I
Yeah.
think ever got on the pitch. I
Mm.
mean, just the way they played, it was magical. And Messi was, he was in the middle of it with these other unbelievably talented players, and it was the beautiful game, right? You could just see the flow of it. And even before that, you could argue Brazil was the pretty team with
Yeah.
Pele and those guys. These guys, they just took it to another level. And I don't think another team has come close yet to doing, the level that those guys played. And the guy's 34, 35, maybe 36. I don't know. He's still playing at an incredible level.
Sure
And
is.
I think he's going to have a wonderful World Cup. I hope he does.
So the knock on Messi would be that he's sometimes a bit too quiet and he kind of leads by example, whereas Ronaldo's a bit more vocal, bit more, get in your face. Your thoughts about that?
Two different styles, and it depends on your team, right?
Right.
Ronaldo is, he wants the team to play around him,
Mm,
and that worked for in many cases. At Man United and certainly at Real Madrid, you can't debate the outcomes of some of that. He forced his personality, and he had the results. On the other hand, Messi has done it this way for a long time, and the difference is, I think Messi made other players around him
yeah.
better.
Yeah.
That's the difference of the two. Where unequivocally, Ronaldo, just a pound for pound from an athletic perspective, is a better athlete than Messi. He's just, he's a freak of nature almost
Sure
at his
is.
age,
Yeah.
and he takes care of himself.
Yeah.
But I'm not so sure he made all the other players better
Mm,
from a skill or technique perspective, or even a system perspective. Some would argue he broke systems down because it was too centered on him.
mm,
Where Messi, you can have 11 really good players and come up against a team with two great players and, nine okay players. The team that's more complete usually over time usually wins. And
mm.
and I think he's demonstrated that time and time again. He elevates the whole team. And if you watch
Sure
him
is.
closely, you'll see plays happen, and he'll pass the ball, and no one's there, and someone will say, "What happened? That was a bad pass." And you could see him looking at the player that was on the left wing that should have been
Right.
screaming down
And
into the
cutting.
box,
Yeah.
and he just has to look. He says, "The ball was in the right place. You were not in the
You
right
were not.
place." And so
Yeah.
he has his way of teaching the players.
I remember there was a press conference once with Ronaldo, and it was like Pepsi was a sponsor. And Ronaldo like pushed the Pepsi aside and said, "I drink water." And Pepsi's stock actually dipped like
Yeah,
points. The next,
yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
incredible. Another thing I noticed, we had the Super Bowl here in the States, and 150 billion people watch, which is just a little bit below last year, but still a lot of people. That
150
day,
million, 150
150
million.
million. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
150 million. That day, so my team, I'm a Manchester City fan. Manchester City was playing Liverpool, regular season game, right in February. 650 million people watched.
Yeah, yeah.
So here in
Most
the
America,
States, we don't understand the gravity of the game.
we don't. It's come a long way, and it still has a long ways to go. But we think the Super Bowl is the center of the universe. There's another game that's the center of the world, and you can't even imagine how many people. I mean, you go anywhere in Europe during a game, and it's their home country or their hometown. The whole city just stops. It's like the Super Bowl every weekend, and it's generation after generation. I mean, you can sit here and argue, well, my dad was a Giants fan. I'm a Giants fan. This is on
Yeah, it's different.
on
Yeah.
another level.
And then, like Germany, for example, where the town actually owns a part of the team. So they actually get to vote on some decisions. The only equivalent we have here in the States that I know of is Green Bay. So Green
Yes,
Bay has part of that team, but no other major team that I know of in any sport has part of it. So not only is it vested, but in those German cities, it's actually part of their ownership. It's amazing.
yeah, it's organic in their blood. I mean, it's more than just a sport. It's a way of life, right? And everyone grows up playing soccer.
That's
Everyone
right. Yeah.
understands the game and appreciates the game. And sometimes when you watch a European game and you'll see boos and ahs, and some people will say, "Well, nothing is happening." It's just because the average American may not understand the subtleties
Right.
of where somebody should have been or what
Yeah.
somebody actually did, where everybody in Europe and South America, around the world, has played the game at some level. And so they have this deep ingrained understanding of the game.
Yeah, when they see like 5 one-touch passes to get the ball from the keeper to the midfield, we will start applauding because we understand how beautiful that was. And perhaps, I was sitting with a good friend of mine and we were watching a game, and I said to her, I said, I wish I could see the game in your eyes right now, because I'm sure
I'm missing
I
some.
see so much through. So you coached your daughters. Tell me what coaching taught you in the business world now, Mike.
There's a couple things that you learn, and I'll tell you, and you have to go through different licensing things to get there. I sat on the sidelines, almost too many times, where I saw dads who may have been athletes who
Mm,
standing up probably couldn't see their toes
mm,
at this juncture in
mm.
their life, yelling and screaming at their daughters, to do things on the field or when they made a mistake, and it would always make me cringe. I can't tell you how much that bothered me. And I could see it with the kids. Like they were just afraid to make a mistake.
Yeah.
And I remember watching one video because, like I said, you have to go through different levels of licensing to coach at different levels. And the most instructive thing I ever saw was a video they showed, and it was terrific, where the game was over, and the minute the kid got in the car, the dad started telling the girl, his daughter, what she did wrong,
Mm.
and the girl's just crushing
Right.
herself,
Right.
and in the skin on the back of your neck is going up, and you say, oh my god. And then they showed the video again the next time, and the dad gets in the car and he goes, where do you want to go for ice cream? And the
Mm.
kid goes, oh, I'd like to go here, I'd like to go there. And you know I think the thing that teaches you, it's just common sense, to most people, is people make mistakes,
Yeah.
right? And everybody knows the mistake they made, whether it's on a soccer field. You don't have to tell somebody they made a mistake. They remember every single mistake. And I think the same's in business. People make mistakes all the time. And you don't have to grab them, and you don't have to say it exactly at that moment when it's the worst moment possible to say it. Sleep on it, next day, reflect, 24 hours, something like that. Pull them aside one on one and quietly show them how they could improve, or
Mm.
show them how that was a good try, but maybe here's a better way. And I just think you get much more of a response with that style, or it's worked for me in the business world. And I certainly don't think it works at all, especially with kids,
Mm.
or almost at any level. Really having that shouting. Maybe at the pro level they have to do stuff like that, but when you're with the youth soccer, when youth, I mean all the way up to about 18 before they play in college, you know, there's many ways you can teach kids, but I think walking in with the stick is absolutely the
Right.
wrong way.
Right. Yeah, we've seen it before where, yeah, you have, I coach my daughters as well. And I remember I would have kind of these parent meetings, and I'd have 4 or 5 a season. I remember it was a second meeting, 3 or 4 games in, get all the parents there and the kids, we're having a great time. And, the girls are really learning. And, you have any questions? And this one father raised his hand and said, I think we could do a better job on corner kicks. We're not capitalizing. We could score so many more goals on corner kicks. And I said, oh, this is great. Thank you so much, Mr. Smith. Do you hear that, girls? So the last 10, 15 minutes of our practice, Mr. Smith has volunteered to come and teach us how to do corner kicks and how we could score more. This is going to be great. And he just kind of stepped back, and nobody else asked any more questions about that.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
you know,
yeah. Just completely disarmed them, right? Yes,
yes, yes.
yes,
Don't disagree. Don't shout. These girls need to know how to dribble close to
yeah,
themselves. They know how to do first touch. They need to know how to understand how the dimensions of the field work. Offside traps and corner kick set pieces are really nice, but let's get a lot of the fundamentals down.
that's right.
Let's get them to understand how. And I can always tell the girls, by the way, tell me if you saw this. I can always first practice. I can always tell the girls that had an older brother.
Yeah, yeah. They were rougher, and
Yes.
they knew how to elbows and
Fight.
push, fight. Yeah, the feisty, because they're knocking around with their brother, right?
That's right.
Whoever had an older brother understands.
I say, what's your brother's name? She said, how do you know I have a brother? I said, I know you have
I know.
a brother. I know. Yeah. And it's wonderful. I miss those days. I know you're empty nest now.
Oh,
They've gone away.
yeah, yeah. I have a daughter at Cornell and a daughter at Wake Forest. So it's yeah. I miss the days of seeing them. Although my daughter is playing at Cornell on the club team, and which is they just went to the nationals and came in third place in the
Wow.
country. So that was exciting. And so she's playing on a very competitive club. I mean, it's like Division 1 soccer. I mean, some argue that the club team's better than the Division 1
Wow.
team. So that's been fun that she's still continuing to play, and she's having a great time. But
Such a wonderful sport.
I miss the sidelines.
I do
I
too.
had plenty of fun, so
Yes.
it was great. It was
Yeah,
great.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And now you've made the transition to pickleball.
I have, and I love it. My wife started playing in the fall, or she was playing maybe in the summer, and then in the fall she pulled me into it, and played a bunch of times. And then I got into a club in January, and all of a sudden now I'm in the men's some men's league, and I'm
Wow.
playing 2 or 3 times a week, and it's fantastic. It's a great game. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, and it's interesting. As you get older, your skills diminish, and you don't realize how much they diminish. And you can work out regularly, and elliptical, lift weight, do all the stuff, but you don't do anything with your reflexes much anymore. And when
Mm,
I started playing pickleball, man, the ball was
it's
whizzing by
quick.
me. And it's like my brain saw it, but my hand didn't move. And I was like, what's wrong with me? Like, I should have gotten that. And it's amazing how quick your reflexes, your lateral movement and your bursting increases as you play the game more. And I remember watching these guys playing. I was like, I can't even believe that they're hitting the ball back and forth so close, so
Mm,
fast.
mm.
And now I'm 3 months into this thing, and all of a sudden now those reflexes are getting better. So it's a great game from that perspective. But you got to be careful too. There's a lot of guys who I've seen a few hamstrings go, and a couple rolled ankles. It's not without its risks, but it's a lot of fun. A lot
It
of
is
fun.
a lot of fun. You got to stay out of that kitchen.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
there's some neighborhoods though that are shutting it down because it's louder than we think. I don't have any near my place, but the knocking of against the paddles and on the ground is making neighbor. Have you heard like some of these sites are shutting down?
I haven't heard them shutting down, but I certainly would live by a pretty big park that's got a lot of tennis courts, and I never heard any sounds on the tennis courts. But now, when you go to play pickleball, especially on a summer night or on a fall night, all you get out of your car and you're 100 yards away, and it's like a little bunch of crickets
Yeah,
going off
yeah,
all over.
yeah.
So if you live real close to the park, that's probably not a good thing.
Yeah, it's still fun though. It's good to get out there, get a sweat going, get those competitive juices going, and
No.
um, it doesn't take as long as golf, and which is a big time suck, but just as addictive. Mike, you had an incredible career in telecom, right? AT&T to Bay Networks to Nortel to Flatiron, Spider Cloud, XCM, and now at FlowMind. Tell me about the transition there. What did you like about it?
I kind of went with the wave of each, whatever, 3+ decades. Telecom was bursting, and that was an exciting place to be. Got great training at AT&T. And then I had my shot at a startup company, which was really exciting in the wireless space when that was exploding. We sold that to Qualcomm in
Oh,
2005 for $800 million. That was a great exit. And it was a 4G OFDM play, but I didn't really know much about mobile, but I knew a lot about networking. And then I parlayed the technical absorption of wireless, which is when wireless was really exploding, and so that was a lot of fun. And then I parlayed that into Spider Cloud Wireless, where I met Alan Baugh, who's a co-founder of our company, FlowMind, and he was the founder of this concept. Can we take Wi-Fi size access points, and can we make those for license spectrum for indoor buildings? Because
mm.
there's a lot of problems getting a signal inside of a building, and everyone thought that was impossible. You couldn't do it. The chips didn't exist. It was just a different problem to solve. But we successfully did it, and we shrunk the base station, as we like to say. So that was an extension of my wireless career. We sold that to Corning, and they had great success with that product. If you go into any Apple store across the country, that product is in every Apple store
Really?
around the country. So that was a lot of fun. And then I did Exium, which was my first foray into security, and that just made a lot of sense because it was kind of the cloud consolidation, right? You think back of 365 servers when a lot of MSPs were selling 365 servers, and then all of a sudden Microsoft put that in the cloud as so many things migrated to the cloud. SASE, right, was the next iteration of that in cybersecurity, and it made so much sense. Consolidate all of these technologies and these pizza boxes into one
Hmm.
cloud instance and deliver the services, to the customer from a platform provided in the cloud, encompassing everything. Because you really need all of the technology, and there was a lot of gaps, with this discrete pieces of equipment. So I did that for about 3 years. We sold that company to Netgear, and then I re-met Alan. We'd stayed in touch, but I hadn't talked to him for a while, and we bumped into each other again in the summer. And he explained to me what he was doing at FlowMind, and so that was it. Was a one hour call on a Monday, a second call on Wednesday, and it was a handshake on Friday.
Wow.
And we were off to the races. I just fell in love with it, and I just said, this is so compelling. I can't walk away from it. And it's so much bigger than anything else, right? When you think about networking and the internet exploding, you think about mobile exploding, you think about cyber exploding. The whole AI thing is so many dimensions, as we all know. We're just a tiny sliver of this dimension, but it's breathtaking in its breadth, and just something exciting that I couldn't not do. And especially with Alan, who's just a brilliant engineer with vision and foresight, and super hardworking, and he's just really developed something very special here.
Hmm. So the first acquisition was to Qualcomm. Could you share some of your best, what you learned from selling to a big company like that?
Well, always have a plan B.
Really?
Yeah, because I'll give you one short story. Flarion was a terrific company, and Rajiv Leroy was the founder. Ray Dolan was the CEO, and I was the president. I had zero mobile background, um, and we had put all our eggs in one basket, mostly in North America, and we were selling to Nextel, who also had invested in the company, and we were going great guns. And the phone kept on ringing from these guys in Europe, and everyone was like, "Don't forget about Europe. They're all 3G. They'll never look at anything different." But I
Hmm.
kept on saying, "I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure," because I had a clean sheet of paper. I had no biases at all. And I took Rajiv and I went to Europe, and we met with a whole bunch of customers, Vodafone, T-Mobile, etc. And we came home and shocked at how open the opportunity was for us in Europe. So we started an operation in Europe with great success. And the long story short is that when Qualcomm came to acquire us, I don't think I'm telling tales out of school now. It's They bought us for we wanted X dollars, and then the price came dramatically down because they found some cross licensing issues because we were spun out of Lucent New Ventures,
Hmm.
and the price came dramatically down. And we said, okay, that's fine. You don't want to buy us? That's okay. And we were moving straight ahead to enter into major licensing agreements with all of the suppliers in Europe. And that diversity and having the ability to have a plan B, I think was really important for the company to give us leverage in those negotiations. And we finally settled at what was a very fair price for both sides. I think at $800 million. I can assure you that if we didn't have a plan B, we would not have sold the company for $800 million. And so, lesson learned, right? You're running any company. It's easy to get excited at the shiny thing or the strategic partner or some big account that's just going to bring you, to the moon. Um, my advice to any younger CEO or executive running a company is you always need to have that plan B or plan C, because plan A's a lot of times don't work.
Hmm.
And even if you end up with plan A, you want plan B so you can have leverage with plan A.
Hmm.
And that's happened time and time again, in my career. There's no epiphany here, but it can happen, and I've seen it happen, especially with less experienced young entrepreneurs, right?
Hmm.
So always have a plan B.
Should you always be willing to walk away?
Well, you're always willing to walk away when when you have a plan B, you can walk away,
Right.
right? If you only have plan A, you have two choices, right? Suck it up, and they're pitching and you're catching.
Yeah.
Pitching and you're catching, and you don't get a vote, right? So if your company's in trouble or you don't have an alternative, they're going to dictate the terms
Hmm.
of the partnership and acquisition, whatever you're working on with that other prospect.
Hmm.
You've always got to have that plan B, and it feels bad sometimes because human nature is no. I know these guys. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And I always say, yeah, I used to believe in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, but it doesn't always happen.
Right.
So have a plan B.
And did you use what you learned there for your next acquisition? I believe was that Spider Cloud.
Yeah, you always use it everywhere. You always have to have that diversity in every wherever you go. You have to have it, and sometimes there's weak plan Bs, and sometimes there's strong plan Bs.
Hmm.
Depends on the company and the situation. In the place of Flarion, we had a very strong plan B. I mean, it was absolutely an alternative for us to license our technology for the next generation of 4G into the European marketplace, and Qualcomm wanted to own and dominate, that 4G space, and we had some terrific technology that got included in 4G, but we could have done it a different way. It would have been a longer and more painful path, and maybe even more lucrative. I don't know,
Hmm.
but we certainly had another path that we knew we could drive, and we had big guys around us that were willing to stand with us as well.
So the advice to a great serial entrepreneur like yourself that goes from one venture to another, you just what is the old saying? The Godfather. Every time I go away, they pull me back in, or something like that. And so, what you bring all this knowledge to FlowMind. What are some steadfast rules that you had that you shouldn't go past now in this new venture?
Well, sometimes you have to have a plan, right? And but you also have to be able to adapt, right? Especially in the early days of a
Mm,
company, you don't want to be zigging and zagging all day long. You got to have a team that has an open mind, that wants to vet, every issue or every pivot that you go through. Like, what is the evidence? What makes you think that? It's not like I have a good feeling that we should do this today or we're going to do that tomorrow. You have to have the patience to stick on a call for an hour or two when you think you have all the answers,
mm,
and you have to have an open mind. And it's got to be evidence based, right? That's the hardest thing. People get into emotions, or it's personal, or this was my baby and this was my idea. uh, if you're running the team, you've got to say everything's open for discussion here, and I'm wide open to criticism as well. You can
mm,
criticize my idea and tell me
mm,
why I'm wrong,
mm.
because if I make a decision and you support it, and we find out that that decision was wrong, and you come back to me and say I knew it was wrong all the time, then I have the wrong employee,
Right.
right? I want somebody that's going to tell me before I make the mistake that it's a mistake, not after I make a mistake that you knew it was a mistake. That's easier said than done, because a
Mm,
lot of people will just sometimes tell you what you want to hear. But in this environment, it's the Wild West with AI, and you need
yeah.
to move fast. You got to be alert. You got to watch everything that's going on. You got to figure out how to differentiate yourself. You got to market yourself with small dollars, generally, with a small company. You got to find your niche. You need to know the problem that you're solving for the customer and talk in their language. What's your pain point? Like, what are you doing? Like, one of the things that we're doing now is in talking with MSPs and putting our product into their offices, is that we're offering, can we come sit with you for 2 or 3 days in your office and just watch the operations?
Wow.
Just sit there. And we've been on a couple of these now, and like we're finding out all sorts of things that we had no idea. Like, we thought we solved, we have this beautiful shiny thing. We think we solved this problem, and this is the biggest problem. And sitting next to some of these MSPs, it's like, oh, they have other problems, like, and some of which we can help with, and it's kind of expanded our footprint a bit. And then there's other problems that we can't, but it puts context around how they operate and how they think. it's the old axiom, walk in the other guy's shoes. And, that to me is incredibly important, so that when you're having that dialogue with somebody, a lot of times, and I see it with young salespeople, it's like, I've got 42 points and 42 slides, and we're going to get through all 42
Mm.
slides no matter what, because if I get through 42 slides and you say you'll have another meeting, that's success,
Hmm.
right? To me, if I get through 3 slides and I touch their pain point, that's success,
Yeah.
right? Because now I'm solving a problem. And so it takes a little discipline to do that. But I always say, just find out what their problem, what are you solving, right? You just can't have a great product and yell at somebody, this is a great product. If they don't click, and the click is, you make my life easier. If you can't walk away asking the question, does this make your life easier?
Hmm.
Does this help your business? And they can't answer that question, then either one, your product doesn't do that, or two, you didn't explain it properly.
Could you ever imagine? I mean, you're in telecom, you're in these enterprise areas of wireless and networking, and a technology like AI is here, and it's just at its infancy. I mean, it's amazing that we can both be alive and see some of these great technologies in our own lifetime.
It's accelerating so quick.
Yeah.
I mean, it's breathtaking, and you get all the news feeds every day, and I spend probably a half hour every morning just catching up on crap that filters in,
Right.
and then you tag something that you want to read later on. But you got to be aware of, like, kind of everything that's going on, because it's all influencing each piece. Like, everyone's trying to find out their swim lane, and there's so many dynamics going on, from the hyperscalers to the chip world to the software. What's happening to the SaaS guys now? What pressure are they underneath? Is AI really going to eliminate all software people? Are the jobs going to go? There's so many. It goes from the technology, it goes to the organization structure, and it goes to impact on human beings. Right? It's across the board, and it's happening. Like, what's that movie, Everything All at Once? There's that
Hmm.
movie. Like, it's like everything's happening
It
and all at
really
once,
is.
and it's hard to keep up with it sometimes.
It
But you
sure
have to,
is.
right?
Yeah.
You have to understand it.
So why work with managed service providers, MSPs?
Well, I think there is a huge opportunity with the MSPs, right? So you think about the dynamics that are going on, they're at the forefront of this, right? They have all these enterprise accounts. Generally, they're not big organizations that says, I have my AI research staff, or I've got this group, and I've got various people that I can push to. So here they are. They have multi-vendor environments. They've got multiple customers. They've got the dynamics of security issues. They've got downtime issues. They've got skill gap issues, and they're under tremendous pressure, right? So, how do you solve those problems for them? How do you help them? And I think that's a great opportunity there. I think that the MSPs, and it's not the first time you've probably heard this. I think the MSPs have an opportunity to reinvent themselves over
Hmm.
the next 1 or 2 or 3 years, um, because the world's changing, right? Their customers are saying, make sure I'm secure, right? You have to make sure I'm secure. So how do you do that? Number two, you've got to do this in a cost-effective way. Like, I can't. They're selling to other companies they're under cost pressure as well. How do I synthesize this and make sure my organization is running as lean as it can, so that I can still make a profit margin, but I can still solve my customer's problem? And then the third one, which is kind of my new pet rock, is that I think the MSPs might have the opportunity to become, the AI consultants to these enterprises. I think there's a whole business of just becoming AI consultants, um, to that community, and I think it's a big opportunity, because these enterprises, they don't have the expertise, and that they never will. They may have some. They may have one or two IT people, and some of the big organizations have more. But the MSPs can really walk in and migrate. They've migrated them to the cloud. They've done security for them. But inside the business itself, how can they use AI? How does that help them? So I think there's an opportunity there, and in a weird way, I think we could actually help with that.
Hmm. You mentioned that the customers that they have are enterprises. By that, do you mean small to medium businesses?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, small medium, they're customers. So
Right.
so the MSP would be our customer, and the MSP will deliver our service and services, all their whatever's in their portfolio to the enterprise. So I think the MSP has the opportunity to be even a deeper consultant to those
Mm,
enterprises
mm,
and
mm.
become even more valuable and more sticky to those guys. And I think everything around this AI, because AI is touching everything, right? It's going to touch the cloud, it's going to touch security. Well, everything that's in their portfolio is going to be touched by AI. And so being able to really organize that and help small and medium businesses use that as a productivity tool for the enterprise, not just a solution. And instead of being, especially on the service side, being a cost center, it could turn into an asset, right? It's just you're not just the per se trouble ticketing organization, or there's no joy that comes, right. The only time you're happy is when no one's talking to you because there's no problems, and then when there's a problem, they associate it always with you. So you're kind of a cost center. What about if you turn it upside down and you solved and relieved that time that the technicians are using to fix problems, and they became proactive and they became an asset where they're actually selling consulting services, architectural issues,
Hmm.
migration to the cloud. There's so many different things that they could do that would make them invaluable to these enterprises. And so I think that's the change, as opposed to saying, we'll take care of your passwords, we'll set up your 365, and we'll get your security in, and then that's it, and then we'll just monitor your networks. I think there's a metamorphosis here where they can now proactively go out and start real, there are some very good ones that are doing real consulting services now, right, where they can go out and add a lot of value. And I think those are going to be the guys that don't lose customers. They're going to
Mm.
have the lowest churn.
How does FlowMind help MSPs, Mike?
So, our claim to fame is, what we saw as the opportunity is that we were old networking guys, and we saw kind of how network resolutions happened, right? And we saw that not a lot of technology, or not a lot of automation and progression had happened in the space. The techs were still getting onto the Meraki dashboard and looking down and checking the Wi-Fi, getting on the Fortinet to check the firewall when a trouble ticket came in. And we kind of did the analysis on this, and it's like it takes 2 hours. So when trouble ticket comes in, that doesn't mean it's in somebody's hands immediately. So there's some delay, and then you get the skilled tier one, tier two, or tier three tech who starts working on these problems, right? And it's almost like manual intervention, right? And so it's an hour at least, if not a 2 hour process. And if it's a tough ticket, a tier two or tier three ticket, it could take an hour, it could take 3 days, or they can't find a problem. And so when you cross pollinate that across an organization, it was so inefficient. I mean, there's got to be a better way to do that. And what we saw as the first iteration moving to utilizing AI were companies that were using what we call automation, right? It's like, let's automate this. Let's get linked into the RMM of a system, and let's have all your old trouble tickets. And so now when a trouble ticket comes in, we're going to look at all the old trouble tickets, and then we're going to come back and say, we think it could be this, and then hand it back to the tech. So some efficiency gets derived, but the tech's still got to do the work
Hmm.
to figure out what was wrong. So some movement there, and what we saw is what we call this discovery problem, right? So you didn't really investigate the network. You didn't do anything. It's like if you walked into a doctor's office and they didn't take your blood pressure, they didn't look at you, didn't check your heart, didn't do anything, and you walked in and you said, "My wife's got a cold." And the doctor said, "Well, you probably have a cold. So go home, drink a lot of water, and take some rest." Um, what does that mean, right? That's just, because the automation told you've been around someone that's got a cold. You've got a cold. When you go into a doctor's office, they take your blood pressure, they monitor you, they give you a flu test, they give you a COVID test. The doctor does an analysis and investigates what's wrong with you. And it comes back and says, "Well, your husband, your wife has a cold, but you have COVID. And here's the medication we're going to give you for COVID." And so it's a rough analogy, but when you look at our system, it does the investigation. So when a trouble ticket comes in, we immediately start doing the tests. We are looking it at the Wi-Fi network, at the SD-WAN network. We're looking at your 365 network. We're doing a complete analysis that a tier one, tier two, tier three tech would do that generally is an hour to 2 hours of work. But we do that in about 120 seconds.
Hmm.
So it's breathtaking in how fast it is. There's no agents involved. There's no on-prem equipment. It's all software based. But we've put together this operations intelligence platform that can analyze someone's network extremely fast in an automated way and do all of the discovery and diagnosis, and then come back and summarize in a tiered way what the problem is and here's why we think this is the problem. And so all of that work is eliminated, right? And it's route work, right? It's a pain in the ass work. Tier one techs can take care of tier one problems, and then you get your tier two and tier three guys. They start looking at some of the more complex things, and they have years of experience. And then they start doing what we call cross domain analysis. Like, just because your Wi-Fi is slow doesn't mean you have a problem on your Wi-Fi network, because a lot of analysis is done that way. Up a little slow down on the Wi-Fi, it's the Wi-Fi's fault. Well, it wasn't the Wi-Fi's fault. It actually happens to be the policies off on the on the firewall, or something's wrong with 365. It could be a networking problem. And so the cross domain complexity of this is really where the hard work gets done. And so that's where we really shine, where we do cross domain, right? We take in not just the networking information, we're taking in office productivity technologies. We can ingest anything. And the secret sauce of our company is the orchestration and synthesization platform underneath that utilizes AI. It's not AI perspective. In perspective, it's just not AI alone. It's really the platform that does this. So it's super intelligent, and it gets smarter as you go. And so when we walk into an office, or meet with an MSP, the first thing we do is, like, let us show you our demo on our website. First click is a 4-minute demo, and they watch the 4-minute demo. And no matter how much I explain it to them, when they see the demo, they say, "I got it. I got it. Now I know what you're saying." So it's exactly, as I described, it automated all of the tests that a tech would do, but it does it in 2 minutes or less, and what would take 2 hours. And so the manifestation of that is that, by the way, with all complete documentation, you'll see the network topology, you'll see every test, it's all correlated. A lot of the stuff gets lost in the sauce. You have a direct root cause. But the beauty of this now is that, when you have a problem that even we can't solve, then you bring in the superstar to find out what the problem is. But 95% of the time, we solve the problem, right? We know what the problem is. So what does that do to this, back to the MSP, to walk in their shoes, right? So what does that do for the MSP? They may have, say, five engineers, knock engineers, or IT engineers, maybe 10 in their organization, like, and they're just working on problems. What would happen if they just weren't working on problems, right? They could be working on the technology. And IT people, they're a rare commodity, right? They actually understand technology, and they understand the use case, and they understand the customer. If they had time to really understand the client's architecture, or their strategic goals as a business, and that's when I went back to these AI consultants, you could really redirect and repurpose a lot of the MSP resource into these other pieces of the business, right? And so it's not like you have five IT engineers, and now you want to open up a consultancy business. Now you got to hire five more people for consultancy business that you have no revenue for. That's from a business model perspective, somebody's outlaying a lot of money and betting on the come that it's going to work. How about you could take three of those personnel and say, focus on this AI consultancy, because we've got deriving all that efficiency out of the system. And so that's the story, and it's resonated extremely well. Everyone that we've talked to thus far has said, "Yep, you're solving a real problem here," because uh, you know I've got three problems. One, trouble tickets are increasing 20% year over year. I mean, that is extraordinary, right? So in 2.5 years, or less, the amount of trouble tickets you have are going to double, and they're going to be more complex. So the second problem is the skill gap. So complexities in it. AI's in the middle of this. Security's getting more complex. Cyber is tough. Every technology piece is accelerating. So what's the skill gap? So now you have this superstar tier two, tier three tech that's been with you for 5 years. He's learned everything. It's in his head. And he said, sorry, guys, I got another offer. I'm leaving. And they're gone. And while he walks out the door, he's walking out the door with all that experience.
Yeah.
And so how do you replace that experience, right? That domain experience, and start from scratch one, where in our system, all the data is retained, and actually it's a good training tool. And then the last piece is the cost issue, right? These SLAs, when the digital infrastructure goes down, it is, even if you don't have an SLA, that enterprise is saying, you guys were supposed to take care of me, and I'm not so sure you're taking care of me. And if I've heard one, I've heard 1,000 stories of when a big trouble ticket happens or a big problem happens in the digital infrastructure. 6 months later, that MSP might not have that account anymore. So you really got to be looking at the churn and the cost of downtime in these networks. And today, if your digital infrastructure goes down, you're out of business. I mean, you're out of business. I mean, there's so many. I mean, if you're a retail shop, uh, your Chick-fil-A, and your point of sales goes down in a store, you just lost $10,000 that hour. 5 hours, that's $50,000. I mean, you think about, and that's maybe an extreme example, but it applies to every office, even it's a small dentist office, right? If their system goes down and they can't process things, they're in tough straits.
What if discipline wasn't about punishment, but about unlocking your best self? I spent 2.5 years writing Discipline for Greatness because discipline changed my life. And I know it can change yours too. This isn't theory. Inside, you'll find real, practical steps you can use immediately to focus better, build stronger habits, reduce stress, accomplish your goals, and bring more balance to your life. Whether you're trying to get healthier, improve your career, or simply feel more control, this book gives you the framework. Start today. Grab your copy of Discipline for Greatness at joeypinz.com/book. Thank you. Does FlowMind work with the current MSPs tools, like their professional service application, their PSA, or their remote measuring and monitoring? Does it matter what their tool set is?
We can, pardon me, we can integrate with anybody at this time. So we're integrated now with ServiceNow, with Halo, and we're working with a bunch of the rest of the ecosystem. It takes us about a week to integrate any other technology, more or less.
Amazing.
So it's not that difficult. So if you said I'm working, we're working with Meraki and Aruba, and you came to us and said, well, I've got Ubiquity, we could put Ubiquity into the system. It'd take about a week to integrate Ubiquity into the system. On the RMM side, the same thing. But we're looking to cover all of the RMM players, so that it's just so simple. Because our claim to fame, we call it no more pain, PANE, because you have a pane of glass, right? And we don't want to sell you another UI. And so that trouble ticket comes in. If you're on Halo, it comes into Halo, and you don't leave that screen. The trouble ticket stays inside of Halo. And you can see that when you look at that 4-minute video, the trouble ticket stays right in there. You click and it's running. The process is running, and 2 minutes later, you get the full diagnostic report. You haven't left Halo. It's in the same screen that you had. So you don't have to do anything different. There's no new system. There's no new desktop. There's no new icon for you to go through. So, the ease of onboarding and managing, it's got to be simple, right? You just can't say, I've got something completely different here and you're going to love it. Every startup company says that. You really have to do it, right? You got to make it easy for the customer.
Does FlowMind, will it replace a tech?
I don't think it replaces the tech, right? I think it makes the tech better, right? Because now the tech is going to see the diagnostic flow, right? They're going to be able to recognize a lot quicker what the problems are and how to solve the problem. I think it makes a tier one tech a quicker tier two or tier three tech, right? And so if you had more tier one techs who could become tier two, tier three techs, you just improved, the skill set of your employees. And with that, I mean, there's so many other things you can do, right? As I said earlier, like they now can become an asset. They can actually generate revenue. They can do things that you could never possibly get to, as opposed to just being that cost infrastructure, which is it's the way we do business today. But I don't think that's going to be the way we're going to be doing business in the future.
Mm. Former MSP, Mike, you know this. Talk to MSPs every day. The three things that keep them up at night have been pretty consistent over the last 5 or 6 years. There's a little permutation to this, but number one is cybersecurity. They're worried about their clients getting attacked. If the clients get attacked, they're flat rate. So they got to now allocate all of these resources. They're probably going to get fired. They might even get sued.
Hmm.
Number two is human capital. These engineers you talk about, they're getting great offers. Unemployment in IT here in the States is, less than
Zero.
less than 1%. And so, how are they going to keep their current engineers happy? How are they going to attract new ones? And then third, private equity has poured in hundreds of millions of dollars into this wonderful managed service pool. So their friends are selling their MSPs. They're getting nice cars. How am I going to sell my MSP? So growth. They're worried about growth. How can I have a great tool set, keep my engineers happy, keep attracting new clients to organically grow? That way I'm more attractive to PE. How does FlowMind help in one or any of those?
Well, I think we touched on a few of these, right? One is that when you start to think of the skill set of your employee base, right, you don't want to lose that guy, right? If you're just doing trouble tickets day after day after day, that can be tough, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a huge churn and there's a huge attrition to that, right? Think about if you had a system that could automate all of that work and say, okay, I want to intellectually challenge you and I want you to do the following. And then you laid out a path for them to improve their skill set. And now they can do the AI consulting. Maybe now they can really look at the cybersecurity architecture, not just be reactive, and really understand what the gaps are in a proactive way, actually trying to break into the network to understand what's going on. There's so many different ways that you can improve the life, of that tech. When it gets to the private equity guys, I mean, I think this is it's not going to go away. But if you're an MSP and you want to increase the value of your company, how do you do that? One, you want to have more customers, you want to have less churn, you want to have higher quality employees, you want to have better service offerings. And so, not that we can solve all of those problems, but if you have a system that can respond to downtime a lot quicker, you inherently know you're going to have a much lower churn, so you're more valuable. Number two, if you can get your employees to up their skill set because they're not doing maybe the drudgery work, and now they're actually doing the AI consulting. I can tell you that a PE company will value an MSP at a higher value if their employees are highly skilled in
Mm,
AI, because
mm,
that's where efficiencies don't happen. Like when you see a PE firm roll up 100 MSPs, you don't need 100 CEOs, right? You don't need 100 CFOs, right? And so you see the consolidation that's happening. And maybe if he rolls up 100 MSPs, you might not you might not need 100 technicians or operations guys, right? So that's the jeopardy. But I can tell you, if you've got advanced skill sets, they're not going to let that go, right?
mm,
They're going to want that. And it's going to be, if I'm going to buy Mike's MSP or Joe's MSP, and Joe has got the much higher skill set of employee, one, I want you more, and number two, I'd be willing to pay more.
mm.
And because if you have that higher skill set, it residually comes downhill. You're going to have a lower churn. Your revenue's probably growing quicker. Your downtime's probably better. You've probably had less SLA infringements. These are all metrics that the PE guys are going to look at. So it's a dynamic that's not going to go away. So, the bar just keeps moving, right? The MSPs just got to continue to improve their portfolio and the skill set of their employees. And if they do that, they'll have, better relationships with their customers, and they'll get more customers, and inherently they'll get more value for their company.
Mm. Mike, you've been a CEO many times. What's the loneliest part about being a CEO that nobody talks about?
Hmm. That's a great question. I think one of the hardest parts is sometimes knowing when your team isn't up for the task, right?
Mm,
Like you've got somebody on the team that's really strong but not strong enough,
Mm,
and you're taking the company to the next level. um, the CEO always knows that,
right.
always knows that. Because at the end of the day, whether it's in a private company or a public company, normally a private company will have some sort of board, especially if they're venture backed. And I learned a long time ago from a dear friend and someone that's invested in me multiple times. Gave me one little story or axiom, and he said, "If there's doubt, there's no doubt."
Mm,
And that hit me like a brick. And I was like, okay. And you just don't walk away from that. And I had one other life experience. Um, this is at Bay Networks when they took, it was a combination of Synoptics and Wellfleet and became Bay Networks. And then the board came in and brought in new management, and they brought in two top guys from Intel. And it was a great leader. His name was Dave Shrigley. He was the chief revenue officer, and he was the head of marketing. He did the Intel Inside advertisements, and he was a wonderful man and one of the hardest working guys I ever saw. And he promoted me into a big job. I was a young guy at the time, and I had about 1.5 billion of revenue, had about 1,500 people working for me in a $2.5 billion company. I ran North America for Bay Networks. And I had five regional. I was a senior VP. I had five regional VPs underneath me, and one government VP. And and he was the most friendly guy in the world. But then he sat me down one day and he says, "Okay," he said, "when I do your review, here's how I'm going to judge you. Five of the six of these guys have got to be as good, if not better, than you.
mm,
Because if you don't hire those guys that are better than you, I don't need you."
mm,
And that's another one that stuck with me, and it made me have the courage to, because it happens a lot, not be afraid to hire people that were better and smarter than me. And there's plenty of those people in the
yeah.
world, but I really did hire people that were better than smarter than me. And I think almost all of those five guys, as I recall, all went on to be CEOs. But just the ability to make sure you have the best people all the time. So it comes down to the people thing is
Mm,
your answer your question. You know when somebody doesn't have it and they're not going to scale. And dealing with people, especially at a high level, that's a hard thing, right? Because you're taking something away from them, or you're telling them they're not up to the challenge. Letting somebody go is always the worst part of any job. But the CEO knows that first, and it's in their head, and it's lonely. And then you have to make a choice, because, like I said, if there's doubt, there's no doubt, and you have to do something about it, because you're now responsible for the whole organization, right? And that weakness permeates across the board.
I remember, when I started my tech firm back in the 90s, we turned into an MSP. And I remember at our height, we had a picnic. I think it was Memorial Day. And, we had all these employees there. And then they brought their kids and grandkids. I was getting introduced, Mike, to grandkids. And I remember thinking to myself, this little business I started in my father's garage now affects grandkids. It's like, what is I did not feel happy about it. I was like, I felt more pressure. I remember going back to the office after the picnic and thinking to myself, some of these people that have been here from the beginning are not going to make it as we continue to grow. And I'm gonna have to make some hard decisions here. Exactly what you said there. Because darn it, I'm affecting grandchildren. I mean, this is like a real business. And it was tough to take. It was a wake up moment, I should say. Is that what you think separates a good and a great CEO, to make those kinds of decisions?
Um, well, back to the story with the Intel guys. That's how Andy Grove ran his business.
Yeah,
So those two guys got it from Andy Grove. And so, in the day, Intel was,
sure
the
was.
premium
I
company.
read his book. Yeah.
And I think it's an important part, right? Because you have to be fair. You represent the business, and you have to be fair for the business, and so you have to have that silo on.
Yeah.
But you're not immune to not having the human silo either, right? It's
Mm,
painful, and oftentimes that person is out of their depth, and they probably know it as well. There's been times when I've told somebody they're just not going to make it, and they knew it, and they actually said thank you in a weird way. Um, but that's the hard part, right? You have to be fair to them, to let them know, and be able and prepared to tell them why, right? You just can't say. you're not making the team because I just don't think you're making the team, and
Mm,
or the numbers aren't here. You're terrible. Get out the door. You have to have a conversation with the person, and that's always the hardest part, right? Is the human part of that. But you can't walk away from it because if somebody else isn't going to make it for whatever reason, it's impacting the rest of the
that's right.
organization. And
That's right.
invariably, you know when I've had to do that, you do a lot. You have a lot of you got to think about it for a while, but before
Mm,
anybody else
mm,
knows. And
mm,
when the hardest part is the anticipation, and then when it's over, invariably you say, I was unfair and I should have done that earlier, right? I knew it and I kept it to myself. And as I got older, I realized, the sooner you move, when somebody just doesn't have the skill set or is ill placed in a position, it affects everybody. And ultimately, you're making the company worse. You're not helping that guy out. You're making his life or her life work
mm,
miserable because they're not
mm.
up to the task, and then it's impacting the rest of the company. And you own it, right? You're the CEO. You own it. There's no one else to turn to, right? And you've got a boss too, right? Everyone says, "Oh, CEO's the boss." Well, I don't. Most of my career, I've had 5 or 7 bosses at the same time because you have a board, right? And so, invariably, how's the team doing? Can you rank the team? And you've got to rank the team because the owners of the business, whether they be venture guys or investors, they want to know, and you've got to be clear eyed with that, and you've got to be honest.
I remember when, the first couple of years started my business, my friends would say to me, must be nice not having a boss. And I have more bosses now than I've ever had. I don't know. Every one of my clients, everyone on the board, every vendors, employees to a certain degree, please do not go into business thinking that you're not going to have a boss again. It's a clear myth. Mike, what's the difference between a leader and a manager?
Well, I think you can be a leader and a manager, but I think managers are more task oriented,
Hmm.
and managers who are leaders will manage the task, but will show people how to do it, right, and help people do it. And I think you know, especially as the years go by, I gave the example of, you can tell the difference between a younger salesperson and an older salesperson, right? The younger salesperson wants to get through the 20 slide deck because, they think if they do that, they've got it, right? And as opposed to a more experienced or seasoned salesperson, um, they're listening to the customer. They're more confident, right? And I think that leaders listen, right? They have to listen, and they become better if they listen. Um, and I think they get more respect. People know when you're actually listening, and I think people know when you're not listening. And I think that is almost a left-right turn
Hmm.
for leadership and for respect. Leadership and respect are kind of intertwined. Um, and so I think, you have to have that listening ear. And if you do that, it's easier to manage. Anyone can manage tasks, right? You come up with a set of tasks, you manage the tasks, blah, blah, blah. 3 o'clock on Friday, we're going to review the tasks. But if you don't make the tasks, the leader is, how come we didn't? How do we do better? How do we, and be part of the process and listen to the team, listen to your customers. And I think that's the difference with leadership. It's just, you have to have that aptitude to listen.
Hmm. I've had to have some tough discussions. I wonder if you have had to in the past with managers who thought they were leaders, because the ego kind of gets in, and they're both very important, like you said. But if you're not actually leading, you're not a leader. It can be a tough discussion sometimes.
you know it's a very tough discussion, but it's easy to see, right?
Mm,
When I've had a manager who's been a great leader, um, the team just rallies
yeah.
around the leader, right? There's no you can almost tell by the volume of people. There's always people going behind your back, but the volume of people going behind your back, to complain about something, right? When you have a leader and it's a team, right? We're in this together, and we're a club, and we're going to sink or swim together, and you can see it. You can just see it, like, and they'll almost get defensive, like, you're not going to get to us. We're gonna get this problem solved, or we're going to be the top. sales district or whatever it is, there's a spirit de corps within the team. I think that it's almost like a sports analogy, right? You got your captain of your team, you rally around your
Hmm.
captain and or your coach, and you want to win the game for the team. It's a subtlety, but it exists in the corporate world. I think the corporate world is sports for adults, but it's kind of that way. And the people that treat people lousy or like crap, it all comes around. It all comes around. There's no hiding it over time. It just seeps through the walls, and people will come to you, or you observe, you'll see, and there's just no hiding. There's no hiding, especially in this world,
Right.
because it's moving so quick. If somebody's not up for the task, or they're not working hard, or whatever the issue might be, or they have the wrong style and they don't fit, maybe it's easier to hire because companies are so lean and efficient now. It's hard to hide. In the past, I think it might have been easier to hide some of those not so favorable attributes.
It is hard to hide now, isn't it? Yeah, with all the technology, with everything linking together. Mike, has there been something about 10 years ago that you believed firmly and strongly that you no longer believe now?
Hmm. Well, the one thing I can't say that I don't believe now, but the thing that has surprised me the most
Mm.
is especially I've been looking at AI now for the past 2 years, I guess. The thing that has surprised me is how much you can do with so little.
Mm.
It is breathtaking. I mean, it is just amazing how fast you can move. Um, and everyone's concerned, is AI going to put me out of business, and we're going to lose, that script will be written over the next couple of years. But I've lived through a couple cycles, not like this, but I've lived through a couple cycles where everyone's job was going to go away, or this wasn't going to happen, that and other businesses happened. I think Jensen Huang says it best, right? He doesn't care. CEO of NVIDIA,
Yeah.
he says people are out of their minds if they just think AI is just going to get rid of jobs, and we're going to become obsolete as people. And he actually, his theme is, embrace AI, learn as much as you can about AI. I don't care what school you go to, or even if you go to school. He says you have something that you can use to ask any question in the world. And so your weapon is to become inquisitive, right? To ask questions, to improve yourself, because there's an answer behind that. So you can learn. So people who will adapt and will learn and apply themselves are going to become better, and they'll become more valuable,
Mm.
and they will always have jobs. And the people that don't, that aren't going to embrace the technology, and aren't going to increase their skill sets, I think, sure, there's going to be dislocation, and there's going to be difficulties, in that portion of the population. There's no doubt. But if you're in this technology business, you need to embrace it, right? You need to embrace it, and you need to learn it, and you need to be curious and inquisitive. And I just can't believe how fast it's happened, right?
Yeah.
And I witness it every day. Things that would take for weeks, we're doing in days. I mean, it's just incomprehensible how fast we can go. you know we had to work on SOC compliant. Okay, so here's a real live example. SOC compliant, and to become that level of security clearance and compliance, it was a 6 month process, and it cost 150,000 in previous company. I mean, it was a pain in the ass. And we took our first cut in less than a week. We probably got about 80% of SOC compliant done
Wow.
just by using AI. And just one person. And it just blew my mind away, right? I mean, that's just one example. There's hundreds of examples. But I think, that to me is the thing that I think's changed the most. And it's not a 10-year view, it's a 2-year view, is that you could see AI coming, 22, 23, so 24. But really in 25 now, and 26, when you're really into it, and I'm in the middle of it now, I just cannot believe how fast you can move and how many things you can get done with a small, focused, skilled team. That's a huge difference, and people are finding that out every day. I mean, the kids that are coming out of school today, that have that general technology background and that skill set, I think there'll be more startups than we've ever had,
Hmm.
in our lifetimes, that are going to morph into all sorts of businesses and all sorts of other we talk about the Mag 7, there'll be a Mag 20 here
Yeah.
eventually. There's going to be all these other unicorns and all these other businesses and all these other jobs and careers that we can't even imagine. And I think Jensen Wong's got it right. If you're inquisitive and you have a bright mind, and you're curious, you can improve yourself tenfold more than your degree can, by really, really applying, AI, and really, really utilizing that tool as a power.
I remember 10 years ago, whatever it was, these companies, these new companies had a huge advantage because they were born in the cloud. Of course, these new companies now are born in AI. Imagine the advantage they have. Is there a question, Mike, that you wish more people would ask you?
Uh, yeah. I mean, the question, we're really coming out of stealth mode now. We're commercial now, and we'll get our word out there. It's always just a simple question. It's like, what problem are you going to solve for me?
Hmm.
What problem? I mean, if I went into every meeting and they said, "What problem are you going to solve for me?" That would be great, because I know that the person on the other end, they have a problem, and they're trying to find out if I know what their problem is. And I go into meetings saying, "What's your biggest problem?" Right? I just want to understand what your problem is,
Hmm.
because other than that, we're just talking past each other. And this is like an educational forum. And okay, we're going to do a half-hour call. I'm going to tell you everything about us, and you're going to say, "Yeah, thanks, that's great. I'll think about it and I'll get back to you." As opposed to a meeting that starts with, "This is my biggest problem," and our second biggest problem. And I can sit there and say, we don't touch any of those problems. So maybe this isn't, we didn't vet this call enough. We shouldn't be on this call. But invariably, if we're on the call, we've vetted it enough. And I can say, what is your problem? And, to have someone ask me that question is the most valuable thing for me, because now they're telling me what their problem is. I'm not telling him I'm solving their problem, because I don't know your problem, but you're telling me your problem.
Hmm.
And that the conversation takes a whole different vector. And so now I'm telling them how I'm solving the problem, and they're engaged. And I say, "Well, you don't understand this part of my problem. Okay, tell me more about your problem." And now you're having a conversation with them, and you're like a consultant with them, right? They're giving you their day-to-day problem, and they're trying to figure out, can these guys fix this? Is this going to help me? And how is it going to help me? So that's, to me, I don't know if it's a clarifying point or screening point, but to me, that's the question I'd love from someone to say, how are you going to solve my problems? My
Hmm.
question back is, what's your biggest problem?
So, Mike, I think you know my story, but I started the MSP back in '93, and I was working way too hard, 14, 16-hour days. You're no
Hmm.
stranger to this. And, I was playing a lot less soccer, doing a lot less exercise, and developing poor eating habits. And next thing I know, in front of the doctor, she tells me I'm at 340 pounds. So yeah, I had gained 47 inch waist. So I had gained I knew I was getting big, but I didn't know I was. In your 20s, you're invincible, right? Yeah,
Right.
I'm getting big, but I can handle. So what? Uh, but the next thing she said, rocked my world. She said, "Look, if you don't lose this weight, you're not going to see your daughter graduate." So my oldest was just born.
Oh, wow.
Scared the life out of me, right? It didn't motivate, it angered me, right? So I'm driving home, punching the steering wheel. This is my pie hole. I can abuse myself all I want, but the decisions I make are much bigger than me right now, And so spent the next 6, 7 months, lost about 120 pounds,
Huh.
kept it off. You can't look at these things like a finishing line, right? These are lifelong changes that you have to make. So when I tell people this story, they always say, "What's your secret? How'd you lose the weight?" And I said, "There's no secret. Discipline, right? Motivation, routine, focus. How does discipline play a role in your life, Mike Gallagher?"
You have a routine. Like, I go to bed at night, and before I close the computer, I always write down what my to-do list, what I didn't get on my list.
Hmm.
And that has always been my guiding post, right? Just, I have my to-do list. And it's easy to go through a day and say, "I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that." You never get to it. And then the next day happens. I'm going to get to it. But I literally make a list of things that I have to get to. And I get annoyed when I look at the end of the next day, and I might have 10 things I was supposed to get to. And, I got to three. or I got the
Mm,
4.
mm.
That's a lousy day, right? Like I got to get to 7 or 8. It's okay to play 2 to 3 over. So it goes to your whole point. It's discipline, and then and discipline in every aspect of life. Like um, the league I play on the weekends, but on a league night, it's at 7:30 at night, and so on Tuesday nights, like I'm not, who's in the mood to go play pickleball
Mm,
at 7:30 at night, and you got to
mm.
get in the car and drive half an hour to the court and play for 2 hours and then drive back, and it's like I'm not missing this. I'm not going to miss it. I'm going to do it, and invariably, when you do it, you feel great. And so that's said for just going to the gym or yoga or going for a long walk every day. If you don't have some physical aspect in your life or some outlet, it's going to work into your whole life. It's going to work, especially into your business life. You just won't have the energy. And everyone says, "I have no time." You're right. You're working 16 hours a day, or you're working long days. If you don't do some form of exercise in your life, you'll pay for it
Yeah.
somewhere along the line. You're going to pay for it, and obviously, you recognize that in a big way. But to me, it is just a discipline saying, I am going to work out today. I'm going to fit it in from 12 to 12:30. I'm going for a 30-minute walk with my dog, or whatever it might be that you're going to do. And here's my list. Here's the things I got to do. And it's the clarity of thought when you've got to put it pen in hand. What do I have to do? Like, there's always something that you're forgetting. But when you write it down on a piece of paper, because you can't remember everything.
Mm.
When you write it down on a piece of paper, it doesn't go away until a line goes through it. I don't put it on my computer. It's on my notepad, right? And old school, I got to put a line through that thing, and it works. It works. Some days it goes better than other days, but if you don't, what's the old saying? If you don't have a plan, any road will take you there, or
Yeah.
the destination, any road will take you there. So you got to have some sort of organization.
If you plan to fail, you fail to plan. Is that so
Yeah, so,
the Jets
yeah, right.
Herm Edwards, I think. Yeah. And as a child, was discipline talked about in the household or was it just kind of exemplified?
Well, my dad was very much a disciplinarian, right? When he spoke, you jumped, right? He was a classic Irish Catholic, strong
Mm.
presence in the family. Didn't say many words, but when he said something, you did it immediately. So there was always that discipline, right? And he was always instructive, but when he spoke, you listened and
Mm.
you knew he meant business. And so there was no messing around. My mom was the trying to keep the stray cats,
Mm.
together. We're running around, but when Dad walked in, it's we're all sitting down to dinner at 6 o'clock. You were at the dinner table at 6 o'clock. You knew where you had to be.
Mm.
Or if you had to go do something on Saturday, whatever it might be, there was something he told you had to do. You had to mow the lawn. You did it. There was no excuse. And so, and if you didn't, there was a price to pay. And so it was the beginnings of you need to do this. You've agreed to do it. If you don't do it, this is the consequence. No emotion, just the facts.
Mm.
And and in an unemotional, detached way. That's maybe something terrible to say about a father, cold, detached way. He wasn't a cold, detached person, but when it came to the discipline or the structure, or whatever it was, when he said something, he meant it, right? He wasn't frivolous with his words, and that impacts you as a kid growing up, right? You watch, and he worked so hard. I mean, he killed himself working, trying to help us go through private school and then through
Mm.
college. We didn't have any money growing up. He was working 2 jobs, and it was tough, hard scrabbled life. Um, but he was disciplined in his own life, right? He was up and every day at 5:30 in the morning, worked long hours, didn't get home to 7 at night.
Amazing.
He wasn't he didn't have an easy road. So and so you to watch him, so you see the hard work, and you see the discipline, and then the respect. And so when he says to do something, there was usually a purpose. He wasn't dictatorial. There was a purpose. Wasn't asking you to climb the side of a building or something. But these are the things I need you to do to help the family fabric stay together, whatever it might be. Mow the lawn, do this, or whatever it is that you got to do. You had your assignment, you did it,
Hmm.
and so he was a great mentor in that way.
Yeah, we can all learn something from that generation, can't we? Uh, I'm trying to figure out, Mike, this is an art versus science question. How often in decision process in business, personally, do you rely or ask the gut? Does it come first? Does it come last? Does it come at all?
Uh, so I grew up as a sales guy, and so
Mm,
my maybe only real skill is people skills and feelings.
mm, mm,
I read people for a living,
mm,
and I would say I have a very my gut barometer is
mm,
very good. I mean, it doesn't fail me often, and so I get a sense right away.
mm,
I draw an opinion. I can tell, and it sticks with me. You always try to go through logic and process, but invariably, the gut usually is right. That's been my experience with me personally, anyway.
mm.
And I try not to let my gut interfere with, it's just like I walk in a room and meet somebody, I don't like them.
Sure.
But, as I get to know people, you get to know people, right?
Right.
And you pick up, if you're attentive to that, you pick up all sorts of nuances, whether, little things. What's the old saying? A lot about somebody when what they do when nobody's looking, kind of thing. But you're
Mm,
just watching people, and in any of these businesses, you're all in the same hot tub together, right? It's hard to hide, so you really get to know somebody, at an interpersonal level, professional level, and instinct just takes over for me, and I keep that to myself. I don't advertise. I just it's in there and it's open to change, but my gut has guided me quite a lot.
hmm. So when you got to make some of those hard decisions we talked about earlier as a CEO, and the data is all there, whether to make a decision, but then your gut tells you something different. Now, certainly it depends on the gravity of the occasion, but how much in that type of scenario, how much weight do you put with your gut?
So the gut, somehow the gut always comes to being personal to
Mm,
you,
right.
right? And so what you have to separate from the gut from the business is the impact on everyone else.
Mm,
So that's the dividing line, right? It's just like if it was it's just me and that other person, that's one thing, and my gut could say, I just don't want to be associated with you, or I just don't like, it's just not working. The chemistry's not there. We don't complement each other from a skill set perspective. Those kinds of things. That's one thing, right? That and the gut can prevail, but you can't let your gut prevail in a corporate setting, right? It can guide you. It can give you perspective, but it can't guide you. And to me, the guiding post is the impact that that person is having on the rest of the organization. Um, whether it be they're a bad performer, or they're extremely caustic or negative, and they're having an impact on morale.
mm,
That's a gut thing too, but it's the impact on the rest of the organization, right? So you can't let gut drive things. It's part of the equation. And I think the gut for me makes the antenna goes up, and then you're more attentive and you start to probe, right?
mm,
But then when you probe, it's got to be, on the facts, right? On what's really happening. And you start to dig, and oftentimes the gut gave you the impetus to go dig, and you find out more. And sometimes, the gut was right. Sometimes
mm.
the gut was wrong, but you can't drive the bus by the gut, though.
By the
You
gut,
can't
yeah.
can't do that.
Can't but lead. I like to cite the example. I'm a golfer, so I'm 150 yards out. There's very little wind. I've got an even lie. The pin's in the middle. Everything is saying eight. All the data saying eight. But you know what? I'm not getting there with an eight. I got to go with my seven. So I get all the data, and then I said, let's ask the gut. So I don't know. I had, and that's trivial. Well, some would say that's serious, but I just kind of give that one example of how you know have it be kind of the last gate, to make those kinds of decisions. Mike, what motivates you?
Um, I think the hard part for me is kind of doing nothing,
Mm,
and I've always been in the middle of something, right? There's always the chaos of stuff, and I enjoy that, and it doesn't bother me. A lot of people don't like chaos or abstraction or non-conclusive situations,
mm,
and startups, and especially in a technology world, it's exciting. It gets your adrenaline running, right? on Monday you wake up and it's like, oh, we're the next unicorn. On Tuesday you wake up, it's like we're going out of business, right? And
Mm.
that scares the crap out of me. And then on Wednesday, and it's not for everyone, right? But I like that. I like the excitement of the challenge of it, right? To me, that's like, FlowMind is my baby now. Like I am so committed to making this successful, and I know we will. And so it's like I'm in a hard pickleball game. Like I'm so
Mm.
focused, and I got to beat the other team, and we're gonna win. And I can feel that. Like I want to grow the business. I want to bring on a lot of customers and really be successful and have an impact, in the MSP community, and just help people's businesses. Um, to me, this it's so rewarding to do that, right? It really is. So that's what gets me going. It's the excitement of it, right? And then also sharing it with other people, right? I
Mm.
mean, everyone's, you're when you're in a startup like this, everyone's like on hyper pins and needles, right? Everyone's adrenaline is running. It's exciting. You can feel it. It's palpable, right? You get a phone call. It's like, I got 10 minutes. Let me tell you what's happening. You're listening for 10 minutes, and that is an amazing piece of information that's really invaluable. And then another call comes in as something else is happening, and you're sitting there, trying to put all the pieces together. And then how does that impact the overall company? Or should we be doing something different, or is it validation that we're really on the right path, or boom, we're really going right into the iceberg here. We're going in the wrong direction. So it gets your attention, right? There's no sleeping on the job, right? It's just you're not mailing it in, and that makes life exciting, right?
Want to show your love for discipline, inspiration, and the Joey Pinz podcast? Now's your chance. Introducing the brand new Joey Pinz merch store, where style meets discipline. Choose from premium apparel, cozy hoodies, stylish hats, durable bags, and your new favorite coffee mug, all featuring the iconic Joey Pinz logo. Perfect for podcast fans, discipline enthusiasts, or as unique gifts for friends and family. Every purchase supports the Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations podcast, helping us continue to inspire greatness and promote positive change. Visit joeypins.com/store today and wear your discipline proudly. Joey Pinz merch. Wear it, share it, and live it. Yeah, the excitement, the passion, like you say, the impact. So given all those motivators, Mike, how do you measure success?
Oh, there's so many ways to measure success, right? I think having um, a company, especially when you take something from nothing
Mm.
and make it into a real company, whatever the size is, right? We're at zero revenue right now, right? We're just starting to deploy and put it to the customers. I've got some numbers in my head that I want to reach that I'll keep to myself for now. But
Yeah.
I have some numbers and things that I want. I think there's a couple strategic partners that I think I really want to go after, right, when we started to go after. So I have all these internal metrics, that I have, and I've shared with some of the team. And so I'm measuring myself, right? I think, and so you'll know when you get there, because you'll matter, right? You'll matter to people, right? When customers deploy you, and they really like your system, you're part of them, right?
Mm.
You've made an impact. And if you've got strategic partners that want bigger companies, more sophisticated companies that want to work with you, you know that you matter, right? You've made an impact. And I think there's a good chance that this company is going to matter to a lot of people. Um, and that will make me infinitely, proud of the work that the team's done,
Mm.
and the concept, and the idea, and the hard work that's gone in from, all of the team, especially Alan, who's the brainchild of this. To see where we were 8-9 months ago to where we are now, it's almost intoxicating how much we've done in 9 months. I can't even imagine what we're going to do in the next 9 months. So
Amazing.
yeah,
Mm.
it's fun.
Absolute pleasure talking with you, Mike. I'm excited to learn more about you. I love what you're doing to help MSPs and ultimately the small to medium sized business, which is, the backbone to the world economy. If anybody's watching or listening, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, I'm Mike at flowmindnetworks.com. So again, FlowMindNetworks.com. There's other FlowMinds that are out there. And just get on our website, FlowMind Networks, and there's a nice little deck of slides there. It's not your traditional website, but there's a 4-minute video right at the top. And in 4 minutes, it'll synthesize. You'll save you a lot of reading. It'll either be for you or not for you. But in 4 minutes or less, you very efficiently know if this is something you want to pursue, and you can just click at the bottom and set up a call and be happy to get on with the team and give you a briefing.
Fantastic, Mike. We'll make sure to put in the show notes. Thanks so much for your time today. I can't wait to break some bread with you next time I see you face to face.
That would be great. Look forward to doing it, Joe. Have fun.
Mike. Bye now.
Bye-bye. Cheers.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypinz.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.